The blood on Fletcher Jennings's knuckles had barely dried when he saw her dancing under the paper lanterns at the Taos County Fair, her yellow dress spinning like sunshine against the New Mexico twilight of 1869. He was 17, freshly arrived from the mountains with his father's pelts, and Penelope Foster was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his entire life. Fletcher stood at the edge of the fairground, his broad shoulders already filling out his father's old shirt, his hands calloused from trap lines and timber cutting. The fight had been stupid, some rancher's son making remarks about mountain folk, but Fletcher had ended it quickly. Now, he wiped his split knuckle on his trousers and forgot all about it, because the girl in the yellow dress had turned her head and looked straight at him. Her hair was the color of chestnuts, pinned up with ribbons that matched her dress, and when she smiled at him across the crowded dance floor, Fletcher felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with the punch he had taken earlier. She was young, maybe 16, and her eyes held a brightness that made the lantern light seem dim by comparison. "You just going to stand there looking like a whipped dog, or are you going to ask the lady to dance?" The voice belonged to Samuel, Fletcher's only friend in town, a blacksmith's apprentice with a crooked grin. Fletcher shook his head. "Mountain boys do not dance at county fairs." "Then what are you doing here?" "Selling my father's furs, buying supplies." But even as he said it, he could not take his eyes off the girl in yellow. She had stopped dancing now and stood with two other girls, fanning herself with her hand, laughing at something one of them said. Samuel clapped him on the back. "Go on. Worst she can say is no." Fletcher had faced down wolves and wildcats in the high country. He had survived winters that would kill most men. But walking across that dusty fairground toward Penelope Foster felt like the bravest thing he had ever done. His heart hammered against his ribs, and his boots felt like they were filled with lead. She watched him approach, her smile never wavering, and when he finally stood before her, he realized he had forgotten every word of English he had ever learned. "I am Fletcher," he managed, his voice rough from disuse. He spent most of his days alone in the mountains, talking only to his father and the trees. "Penelope," she replied, and her voice was soft and musical. "Penelope Foster. Are you the one who fought Tommy Richardson behind the livestock pens?" Fletcher felt heat rise to his face. He said some things that were not true. "I heard. Tommy says lots of things that are not true." She tilted her head, studying him with those bright eyes. "You have blood on your hand." He looked down at his knuckles, feeling foolish. "It is nothing." "It is not nothing. Come with me." She took his hand, the one that was not bleeding, and led him away from the crowd. Her friends called after her, giggling, but she ignored them. Fletcher followed, too stunned to protest, and she brought him to a water pump behind one of the vendor stalls. "Here," she said, working the pump handle until water gushed out. "Wash it properly or it will get infected." Fletcher did as he was told, wincing as the cold water hit the torn skin. Penelope watched him, and when he finished, she tore a strip from her petticoat and wrapped it around his knuckles with gentle, practiced movements. "You're good at that," he said. "I have 3 younger brothers. I'm always bandaging someone." She tied off the makeshift bandage and looked up at him. This close, he could see gold flecks in her brown eyes. "There. Good as new." "Thank you." "You're welcome." She did not let go of his hand right away, and Fletcher found himself unable to breathe properly. "Do you know how to dance, Fletcher?" "No. Would you like to learn?" That night, under the paper lanterns strung between the wooden posts, Penelope Foster taught Fletcher Jennings how to dance. He stepped on her feet 3 times and apologized each time, but she just laughed and showed him again. The fiddle music wrapped around them, and other couples swirled past, but Fletcher only saw her. "Where do you live?" she asked as they moved awkwardly through the steps. "Up in the mountains, 2 days north of here. My father has a cabin near the high meadows." "That sounds lonely." "It is quiet, but I like the quiet." He paused, then added, "Sometimes." "And what do you do up there in your quiet mountains?" "Trap, hunt, cut timber, help my father with the pelts." It sounded boring when he said it out loud, but Penelope looked genuinely interested. "Have you ever seen a bear?" "Many bears. Mountain lions, too. Last winter I saw a pack of wolves take down an elk not 50 yards from our cabin." Her eyes widened. Were you scared? Respectful. You respect the wilderness and it respects you back, usually. He found himself relaxing, talking more easily now. What about you? What do you do? I live in Taos with my family. My father runs the general store. I help him keep the books and mind the counter. She wrinkled her nose. It is not as exciting as fighting wolves. I did not fight them. I just watched. Still more exciting than counting sacks of flour. They danced through 3 more songs, and Fletcher learned things about Penelope Foster that he tucked away like treasures. She loved books and reading, especially stories about far-off places. She baked bread every morning for her family. She had a spotted dog named Freckles who slept at the foot of her bed. She wanted to see the ocean someday, though she had never been farther east than Santa Fe. When the music finally stopped and the fiddler announced the last dance of the evening, Fletcher felt panic rise in his throat. The fair only came once a year. He lived 2 days away in the mountains. He would likely never see her again. Penelope, he said, and his voice came out too rough, too desperate. Can I write to you? She smiled at him, and it was like sunrise over the peaks. I would like that very much. I am not good with words. I bet you are better than you think. She squeezed his hand. Write to me about your mountains and your quiet life. I want to know all about it. He did write to her. Every week by lamplight in his father's cabin, Fletcher would sit with a precious piece of paper and carefully form his letters. He told her about the first snow of the season, how it transformed the world into something clean and new. He described the way the aspens turned gold in autumn, whole mountainsides blazing with color. He wrote about the deer that came to drink at the creek near their cabin, so tame they would eat from his hand. Penelope wrote back with stories of town life. She told him about the traveling preacher who came through and accidentally baptized someone's prize pig. She described the new dresses in the catalog from back east, though she said none were as pretty as the yellow one she had worn to the fair. She asked him questions about everything, wanted to know what he ate, what he read, what he dreamed about. Fletcher had never dreamed much before, but now he dreamed about a girl with chestnut hair and a voice like music. That winter was hard. His father caught pneumonia in January, and Fletcher spent weeks nursing him back to health, barely sleeping, keeping the fire going day and night. He did not write to Penelope during that time, could not find the words to explain the fear that gripped him every time his father's breathing turned shallow and rattling. When spring finally came and his father recovered, Fletcher wrote to her and apologized for the silence. Penelope's response came quickly, full of relief and kindness, saying she understood and had been praying for them both. You care about this girl, his father said one evening, watching Fletcher write by firelight. Yes, sir. You planning to do something about it? Fletcher set down his pen. I do not know what I can offer her. We have this cabin and the trap lines. She lives in town, has a family, a life there. His father was quiet for a long moment. Son, I built this cabin when I was not much older than you. Built it because I wanted a life away from people, away from towns and rules and expectations. That was right for me. But you? He shook his head. You were different. You got your mother's heart. She never took to the mountain life, God rest her soul, always missed the company of others. Fletcher remembered his mother only in fragments. She had died when he was 7, and the grief had driven his father deeper into the wilderness. They had been alone ever since. I am saying, his father continued, that maybe you should think about what you want, not what I built for myself. I want to see her again. Then the fair's coming up in a few months. Take the pelts down early, stay in town a few days, see where things stand. Fletcher did exactly that. In August of 1870, he loaded up their pelts and made the 2-day journey to Taos, arriving 3 days before the fair opened. He sold the furs for a good price, bought new traps and supplies for winter, and spent the rest on a room at the boarding house in a new shirt that did not have any patches. The day of the fair, he arrived early and waited near the entrance, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. People streamed past him, families and couples and groups of children, but he barely saw them. He only watched for Yellow. She appeared like an answer to a prayer, wearing the same yellow dress, though she had grown taller and her hair was done up differently. She was 18 now, a woman instead of a girl, and she was even more beautiful than he remembered. Fletcher, She saw him and her whole face lit up. She ran to him, propriety forgotten, and he caught her in his arms. She smelled like lavender and sunshine. "You came," she said, slightly breathless. "I promised I would." "You did." She pulled back to look at him, and her smile faltered slightly. "You are taller and broader. You look different." "So do you. Older, good different." They spent the entire day together, walking through the fair, sharing candied apples and watching the horse races. Fletcher won her a ribbon at the shooting competition, and Penelope laughed when he admitted he had missed his first shot on purpose to avoid showing up the other competitors too badly. As the sun set and the lanterns were lit, they found themselves at the same spot where they had danced the year before. The fiddle started up, and this time Fletcher knew the steps. He took her hand and led her onto the floor, and they moved together like they had been dancing for years instead of that one night. "I missed you," Penelope said softly. "I missed you too. Every day." Fletcher took a breath, gathering his courage. "Penelope, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I love you. I have loved you since the moment I saw you in this yellow dress. I know I am just a mountain man, and I do not have much to offer except a cabin and a hard life. But I would do anything to make you happy. I would move to town, learn a trade, become someone worthy of you." Penelope stopped dancing. For a terrible moment, Fletcher thought he had ruined everything, said too much too soon. But then she reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his rough beard. "You foolish man," she whispered. "You already are worthy of me, and I love you too." He kissed her then, right there under the paper lanterns with half the county watching, and he did not care who saw. She tasted like candy apples and promises, and when they finally broke apart, both breathless, she was crying and smiling at the same time. "Marry me," Fletcher said. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." They got married in September, a small ceremony in the Taos church with Penelope's family and a few friends in attendance. Fletcher's father made the trip down from the mountains, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday clothes, but proud nonetheless. Penelope wore a new dress, white with blue ribbons, and Fletcher had never seen anything more beautiful in his life. After the wedding, they faced a decision. Penelope's father offered Fletcher a job at the general store, a chance to stay in Taos and build a life there. It was tempting, safe, the sensible choice. But Fletcher saw the way Penelope looked at him when he talked about the mountains, saw the curiosity and longing in her eyes. "Come with me," he said the night before they were supposed to give her father an answer. "Come to the cabin, just for the winter. If you hate it, we will come back in the spring and I will work at the store. But give it a chance." Penelope agreed, and they set out for the high country together. The journey took 3 days instead of 2, because Fletcher went slowly, showing her everything, wanting her to love it like he did. They camped under the stars, and he taught her how to read the constellations. They followed game trails through golden aspen groves, and she collected bright leaves to press in her books. When they finally reached the cabin, Penelope stood in the doorway and looked around at the single room with its rough furniture and stone fireplace. "It needs curtains," she announced, "and a proper table, and you are building me some shelves for my books." Fletcher grinned. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." She turned to him, her eyes shining. "This is home now." That first winter was hard but wonderful. Fletcher taught Penelope how to shoot, how to read animal tracks in the snow, how to preserve meat and vegetables for the long months ahead. She taught him how to make proper bread instead of the hard biscuits he had been surviving on. She sewed curtains from fabric she had brought from town and made the cabin feel warm and alive in ways it never had before. His father stayed with them through December, then announced he was heading farther north to try some new trapping grounds. Fletcher suspected the old man just wanted to give the newlyweds their privacy, but he did not argue. They said goodbye on a clear January morning, and Fletcher watched his father disappear into the trees, a solitary figure who had taught him everything about surviving in the wilderness. That winter, alone with Penelope in their mountain cabin, Fletcher learned there was more to life than just surviving. There was joy in waking up next to someone you loved. There was contentment in working side by side, her skinning rabbits while he repaired traps. There was wonder in showing her the hidden places he had discovered over years of wandering, the frozen waterfall that looked like a crystal palace, the hot spring where they could bathe even in the deepest cold. Spring came, and with it a letter from Penelope's mother. Her father was sick, needed help with the store. Could they come down for a few weeks? They packed up and made the journey to Taos. Penelope's father had caught the same pneumonia that had nearly killed Fletcher's father, and while Penelope helped nurse him and run the store, Fletcher found himself feeling trapped and restless in town. The buildings pressed too close. The noise of constant human activity grated on his nerves. He slept poorly, dreaming of open sky and clean mountain air. But he stayed because Penelope needed him there, and he would do anything for her. He helped at the store, lifting heavy shipments and making deliveries. He was polite to the customers even when they looked at him like he was some kind of wild animal who had wandered down from the hills. He bit back his frustration when men made comments about his long hair and buckskin clothes. 2 months passed before Penelope's father recovered enough to manage on his own again. By then it was summer, and Penelope announced she was pregnant. "A baby," Fletcher repeated, stunned. They were sitting in her childhood bedroom, and the walls felt like they were closing in. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Penelope asked, and there was uncertainty in her voice that made him pull her close immediately. "Happy? I am terrified and thrilled, and I do not know if I will be any good at it, but yes, I am happy." He held her face in his hands. "Are you? Happy, I mean?" "So happy I could burst." She paused. "But Fletcher, we need to talk about where we are going to live. I love the mountains, I do, but having a baby up there, miles from any help or doctor." Fear clenched his stomach. He thought of his own mother, dying when he was young. He thought of all the things that could go wrong, miles from any help. "We will stay in town, at least until the baby is born, longer if you want." "You would do that? Give up the mountains?" "I would give up anything for you and our child, anything." So they stayed in Taos, renting a small house near her parents. Fletcher found work where he could, mostly taking on jobs that needed strength and endurance. He hauled lumber for construction crews, broke horses for the ranchers, hunted game to sell at the market. The work was fine, but he felt like a wolf in a cage, pacing and restless. Their son was born in February of 1872, a healthy boy with Fletcher's dark hair and Penelope's bright eyes. They named him Thomas, after Penelope's grandfather. Fletcher held his son for the first time and felt his entire world shift again, just like it had when he first saw Penelope at the fair. "Hello, little one," he whispered, and Thomas grabbed his finger with a surprisingly strong grip. "I am your father. I'm going to teach you everything I know." Motherhood suited Penelope. She glowed with it, singing to Thomas as she rocked him, laughing at his baby noises. But Fletcher saw the shadows under her eyes from sleepless nights, saw how thin she had gotten. Town life was wearing on both of them in different ways. "What if we went back?" he said one evening when Thomas was 6 months old. "To the mountains. We could make it work. We are both stronger than we think." Penelope looked at him with such longing it made his heart ache. "Could we really?" "We could try. Your parents could visit. We could come down every few months, but at least we would be home." "Home," she repeated and smiled. "Yes, let's go home." They returned to the cabin in late summer, and it was like they could both breathe again. Thomas thrived in the mountain air, growing chubby and strong. Fletcher added a room to the cabin for the baby, built proper furniture, reinforced the walls against the winter wind. Penelope planted a garden and canned vegetables, prepared for the seasons ahead. Life fell into a rhythm. Winters in the mountains, springs and summers split between the cabin and occasional trips to Taos. They had another child, a daughter they named Margaret, who arrived during an early autumn snowstorm with only Fletcher there to help. He had never been so scared in his life, but Penelope had laughed between contractions and told him to stop looking like he was about to faint. The years passed like water, flowing, each one marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Thomas learned to track and shoot before he was 10. Margaret could skin a rabbit by the time she was 8. They were mountain children, wild and capable, and Fletcher was proud of them. His father visited less frequently as he got older, but he was there for the important moments. He taught Thomas how to set a proper trap line. He carved Margaret a wooden doll that she treasured. When he died in the winter of 1878, He went peacefully in his sleep in the cabin where Fletcher had been born, and they buried him on the mountain overlooking the valley he had loved. Fletcher was 30 now, his body hardened by years of mountain life. His shoulders had grown even broader, muscles built from chopping wood and hauling game. His hair hung past his shoulders, and his beard was thick and full. He looked every inch the mountain man, but when Penelope looked at him, she still saw the boy who had been too nervous to ask her to dance. They were happy. Life was not easy, but it was good, and they were together. That was all that mattered. Then, in the spring of 1881, everything changed. Fletcher had gone down to Fort Stanton with a load of pelts, leaving Penelope and the children at the cabin. The trip was supposed to take a week at most. He sold his furs, bought supplies, and was loading the wagon for the journey home when he heard a commotion from the other end of town. "Mountain lion!" someone shouted. "Mountain lion got into the Henderson place!" Fletcher did not think. He grabbed his rifle and ran. The Hendersons had 3 young children, the youngest barely a toddler. He reached their homestead to find the father trying to chase a massive cougar away from the chicken coop with a pitchfork. The cat was cornered and angry, blood on its muzzle from the chickens it had already killed. "Get inside!" Fletcher yelled. He raised his rifle, but the cat moved at the same moment, launching itself at Henderson. Fletcher's shot went wide. The cougar hit Henderson and they both went down. Fletcher chambered another round, but he could not get a clear shot with the 2 figures grappling on the ground. He did the only thing he could think of. He dropped the rifle and charged, drawing his hunting knife from his belt. The mountain lion heard him coming and turned, releasing Henderson. It crouched, ready to spring, and Fletcher met its eyes and saw his own death looking back at him. The cat leaped. Fletcher went down hard, 200 pounds of muscle and fury driving him into the dirt. Claws raked his chest and shoulder. He felt the cat's hot breath on his face, smelled blood and rage. But he had his knife, and he drove it up under the cat's ribs with all his strength. The cougar screamed, a sound like a woman dying, and its claws dug deeper, shredding through his shirt and skin. Fletcher stabbed again and again, until the animal's grip loosened and it rolled off him, twitching and dying. Fletcher tried to stand and could not. His chest was on fire, blood soaking through his shirt. Henderson was crawling toward him, his own injuries apparent but less severe. "Hold on," Henderson gasped. "Someone get the doctor." Fletcher did hold on, but barely. The doctor stitched him up and said it was a miracle he had survived. The claw marks across his chest and shoulder would scar badly, and his left arm might never regain full strength. He needed to rest, the doctor said. Weeks, maybe months of rest. But Fletcher could not rest. He had to get home to Penelope and the children. As soon as he could stand without passing out, he climbed onto his wagon and started the journey back to the mountains. He made it halfway before the infection set in. Fever consumed him, turning the world into a blur of heat and confusion. He remembered falling from the wagon. He remembered the ground rushing up to meet him. Then, nothing. He woke up in a stranger's barn, bandages wrapped around his chest, his whole body aching. An older woman sat beside him, knitting. "Welcome back," she said calmly. "You've been out for 3 days. My husband found you on the trail, brought you here." "I need to go home," Fletcher croaked. "My wife, she will be worried." "You're not going anywhere until that fever breaks properly." The woman set down her knitting. "Where is home?" 2 days north, High Meadows." He tried to sit up and failed. "Please, she does not know what happened. She will think. We will send word. My son can ride up there. Let her know you are alive and recovering. But you need to heal, son. No good going home just to die on your own doorstep." Fletcher wanted to argue, but he did not have the strength. He gave the woman directions to the cabin and trusted that her son would find it. Then he let the darkness take him again. It was 2 weeks before he was strong enough to travel. The couple who had saved him, the Parkers, refused any payment. Their son had indeed found the cabin and told Penelope what had happened. She had wanted to come down immediately, but Thomas had fallen sick with a fever of his own, and she could not leave him. "She sent this," Mrs. Parker said, handing Fletcher a letter. He read it with shaking hands, Penelope's familiar handwriting telling him that Thomas was recovering, that she was praying for him every moment, that she loved him and needed him to come home. He made the journey slowly, his left arm in a sling, his chest still healing. When he finally saw the cabin, Penelope was standing in the doorway and she ran to him before he even climbed down from the wagon. "You fool," she sobbed into his chest, careful of his injuries. "You stupid, brave fool." "I am sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I am so sorry." Thomas recovered fully, but Fletcher did not. His left arm healed strangely, the muscles not quite right. He could use it, but not like before. Lifting heavy traps made his shoulder scream. Drawing a bowstring was agony. He adapted, learned to compensate, but he knew things had changed. That summer, they went down to Taos for the county fair. It had become a tradition, going every few years, showing the children the place where their parents had met and fallen in love. Thomas was 11 now, Margaret 9, and they ran ahead through the fairgrounds, while Fletcher and Penelope followed more slowly. Fletcher's shoulder ached in the heat, and he found himself tiring more easily than before. He was only 32, but he felt older. The injury had taken something from him, some core piece of his strength that he could not get back. "Are you all right?" Penelope asked, noticing him favoring his shoulder. "Just sore. I will be fine." But he was not fine, and they both knew it. That winter was brutal. Fletcher struggled with the trap lines, could not chop wood like he used to. They burned through their stores faster than expected, and by February they were rationing food. Thomas helped as much as he could, but he was still just a boy. When spring came, they were all thinner, all exhausted. Penelope looked at Fletcher one morning and said, "We cannot do this anymore." "Do what?" "This, barely surviving. You are hurt, Fletcher. You need easier work, and the children need proper schooling. Margaret wants to learn to read better, wants books we cannot get up here. Thomas needs other boys his age, needs to learn about the world beyond these mountains." Fletcher felt something break inside him. "You want to leave. I want you alive and healthy. I want our children to have a future." She took his hand. "We had our time here. It was beautiful. But things change. We have to change with them." He knew she was right, but it felt like dying. The mountains were in his blood, had been his whole life. Leaving felt like cutting off a part of himself. But he loved Penelope more than he loved the mountains. He loved his children more than he loved his pride. So he agreed. They moved to Fort Stanton in the late summer of 1882. Fletcher found work as a hunting guide, taking wealthy men from back east into the high country on expeditions. It was good money, and he could do it despite his injury. Penelope got a job helping at the new school, teaching the younger children to read. Thomas and Margaret enrolled in classes, making friends, learning things Fletcher could never have taught them. They rented a house on the edge of town, small but comfortable. Fletcher built furniture for it, trying to make it feel like home. But at night, lying in bed with Penelope beside him, he felt restless and trapped. The walls were too close, the air was too still. He missed the sound of wind through the pines, missed the vast silence of the high country. "I know this is hard for you," Penelope whispered one night, "but it will get easier. Give it time." He wanted to believe her. He tried to settle into town life, tried to be content. But as the months passed, he felt himself withdrawing. He spoke less, smiled less. The work was fine, but it was not the same as living in the mountains. Nothing was the same. Then, in the spring of 1883, tragedy struck again. Penelope got sick. It started as a cough, nothing serious, but it got worse. The doctor said it was consumption, said there was nothing to be done but wait and pray. Fletcher prayed like he had never prayed before. He sat by her bedside every moment he was not working, held her hand, read to her from her favorite books. The children tiptoed around the house, frightened by their mother's weakness. "I'm not going to get better," Penelope said one evening, her voice thin and reedy. It was just the two of them, the children staying with neighbors. "Do not say that." "Fletcher, listen to me. If something happens to me, you have to promise you will take care of yourself. You will not disappear into those mountains and let grief swallow you like your father did when your mother died. Nothing is going to happen to you. Promise me. Promise me you will stay here, stay for the children, give them a real life." He promised because he could not refuse her anything. But inside, he felt like he was already grieving. Penelope died on a Tuesday in April, with the spring flowers just starting to bloom outside her window. Fletcher was holding her hand, and her last words were, "I love you. I have loved you since that first dance." Then she was gone, and Fletcher's whole world went with her. The funeral was a blur. Half the town came, people Fletcher barely knew offering condolences he could not hear through the roaring in his ears. He stood beside the grave and felt nothing, just a vast emptiness where his heart used to be. Thomas and Margaret clung to him, crying, and he held them and wished he could cry too. But the tears would not come. He was frozen, locked in ice, unable to feel anything at all. The months that followed were the darkest of his life. He went through the motions, getting the children to school, going to work, cooking meals, cleaning the house. But he was not really there. He was somewhere else, somewhere cold and distant. Thomas, at 13, tried to be the man of the house. Margaret, 11, tried to take over her mother's role, cooking and cleaning. Fletcher watched them struggling and felt like a failure. They needed him to be strong and present, and he could not give them that. One night, 6 months after Penelope's death, Fletcher stood in the dark kitchen and looked at the bottle of whiskey on the shelf. It would be so easy to drink until the pain went away. So easy to lose himself in the bottom of a bottle. But he had made a promise. He had promised Penelope he would not disappear into grief. He had promised to stay for the children. So he left the whiskey where it was and went to bed sober. Slowly, painfully, he learned to live again. Not the same as before. Nothing would ever be the same. But he learned to function. He got better at talking to the children, listening to their days, helping with their studies. He forced himself to smile at them, even when all he wanted to do was scream at the unfairness of it all. A year passed. Then 2. The children grew. Thomas became a young man, tall and strong, interested in joining the cavalry scouts. Margaret became a young woman, pretty and smart, talking about becoming a teacher like her mother. Fletcher was proud of them, but there was always an ache beneath the pride, a grief that never quite left. He kept working as a hunting guide, kept living in the house in Fort Stanton. But part of him was always looking north, toward the mountains. Part of him was always remembering a cabin and a woman in a yellow dress and a time when he had been truly happy. In the fall of 1887, Thomas announced he was enlisting. He was 18, old enough to make his own choices. Fletcher wanted to argue, wanted to keep his son safe, but he knew he could not. Thomas had his own life to live. "I will write every week," Thomas promised, "and I will come home on leave whenever I can." Fletcher hugged his son tight, remembering all the things his own father had taught him, hoping he had done the same. Be smart, be safe, come home. Thomas left in October, and the house felt even emptier. It was just Fletcher and Margaret now, and she would turn 17 soon, would have her own life to live. He could see it already, the young men starting to notice her, starting to come courting. He was 40 now, his hair more gray than dark, his body marked by old injuries and hard years. He looked older than his age, felt older too. Sometimes he wondered what Penelope would think if she could see him now. Would she still recognize the boy who had been too scared to ask her to dance? That winter, Margaret announced she had been accepted to a teaching program in Santa Fe. She would leave in the spring. Fletcher was proud and devastated in equal measure. "You do not have to stay here for me," Margaret said. "Once I am gone, you could go back to the mountains. I know you miss them." "I do miss them," Fletcher admitted, "every day. But they are not the same without your mother. Nothing is the same without her. She would want you to be happy. I know. I just do not know how to be happy anymore." Margaret left in April, on a day that was both sunny and sad. Fletcher helped her load her trunk onto the stage, hugged her goodbye, and waved until the stage disappeared around the bend. Then he went back to his empty house and sat in the silence. For the first time in 5 years, he let himself cry. He cried for Penelope, for the life they should have had together. He cried for his children, growing up and moving on. He cried for himself, a mountain man trapped in a town, a widower who had forgotten how to live. When the tears finally stopped, he felt empty but somehow lighter. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it was not crushing him anymore. He could breathe around it. He thought about what Margaret had said, about going back to the mountains. Part of him wanted to return to the cabin and live out his days in solitude. But another part of him remembered Penelope's words, her insistence that he not disappear into grief. So he stayed in Fort Stanton, kept working, kept living. But he started going on longer hunting trips, spending weeks at a time in the high country. It was not the same as living there, but it helped. The mountains healed something in him that nothing else could touch. Years passed. Thomas wrote regularly from his cavalry post, telling stories of patrols and encounters with Apaches. Margaret wrote from Santa Fe, describing her students and her growing reputation as an excellent teacher. Fletcher was proud of them both, but he saw them rarely. They had their own lives now. He was 54 in the summer of 1899, still strong despite the gray in his hair and beard, still capable despite the old injuries. He took fewer guiding jobs now, spent more time in the mountains alone. People in town thought he was strange, the old mountain man who never quite fit in, but he did not care what they thought. Then, in September of that year, the county fair came to Fort Stanton instead of Taos. The organizers decided to rotate locations, bring the festivities to different towns. Fletcher had no intention of going. He had not been to a fair since Penelope died, could not bear the memories it would bring up. But Mrs. Henderson, the woman whose husband he had saved from the mountain lion all those years ago, came by his house and practically dragged him there. "You cannot sit alone in that house forever," she scolded. "Come to the fair, eat some good food, listen to music, remember what it is like to be alive." Fletcher went mostly to stop her nagging. He walked through the fairgrounds with his hands in his pockets, feeling out of place and old. Everything seemed too loud, too bright. Children ran past him screaming with laughter. Couples walked hand in hand. Families clustered around vendor stalls. He was about to leave when he heard someone calling his name. "Fletcher? Fletcher Jennings?" He turned and saw a woman approaching him. She was middle-aged, with gray streaking her brown hair, but there was something familiar about her face. She got closer, and Fletcher's heart stopped. It was impossible. It could not be. But it was. "Penelope?" he whispered. The woman's face fell. "No, I'm so sorry. I'm Patricia Foster. Penelope was my sister." Of course. Fletcher remembered now. Penelope had mentioned a younger sister, but Patricia had been married and living in California the whole time Fletcher had known Penelope. They had never met. "I apologize," Fletcher managed. "For a moment you looked just like her. Everyone says we looked alike. Patricia's eyes were sad. "I heard about Penelope. I'm so sorry. I was living in Sacramento when she died, did not hear until months later. By the time I got the letter, the funeral was long over." "She spoke of you," Fletcher said. "She always hoped you would visit." "I wish I had. I wish I'd come home more often." Patricia paused. "Are you here alone?" "Yes. My children are grown and gone. Thomas is cavalry. Margaret teaches in Santa Fe. Penelope wrote to me about them. She was so proud." Patricia smiled, and it was so much like Penelope's smile that Fletcher felt his chest tighten. "Would you walk with me? I just arrived today, do not know anyone here anymore. It would be nice to have company." Fletcher wanted to say no, wanted to flee back to his empty house and the familiar ache of loneliness. But there was something about Patricia, some echo of her sister, that made him agree. They walked through the fair together, and Patricia told him about her life in California. She had been married for 20 years to a businessman, had 3 children. Then her husband had died suddenly of a heart attack 2 years ago, and she had decided to move back to New Mexico to be closer to family. "I heard Fort Stanton was growing. Thought I might open a dress shop here," she explained. "I always had a talent for sewing, and I need something to occupy my time. My children are all in California, starting their own lives." "I'm sorry about your husband," Fletcher said. "Thank you. It has been hard, but I'm managing. Grief is strange, is it not? Some days I'm fine, and other days it hits me all over again." "I know exactly what you mean." They stopped at the dance floor, where couples were beginning to gather as the fiddler tuned his instrument. Fletcher looked at the paper lanterns strung overhead, so similar to the ones from 30 years ago, and felt time collapse around him. "Penelope told me about how you met," Patricia said softly. "At the Taos Fair. She said you could not dance, but you tried anyway." "I stepped on her feet," Fletcher remembered, "multiple times. She said it was the most romantic thing that had ever happened to her." Patricia looked at him with those eyes that were so like her sister's. "Would you like to dance, Fletcher? For old time's sake?" He should say no. It felt wrong, dancing with Penelope's sister when Penelope was gone. But the music was starting, and Patricia was looking at him with such gentle kindness, and he found himself nodding. I have not danced in 12 years, he warned. Neither have I. We will stumble through it together. They did stumble, both rusty and awkward at first. But then the muscle memory kicked in, and Fletcher remembered the steps Penelope had taught him all those years ago. He held Patricia's hand and spun her carefully, and for a moment he could almost pretend it was Penelope in his arms, Penelope smiling up at him. But it was not Penelope. It was Patricia, her own person with her own life and sorrows. And as they danced, Fletcher realized that was all right. He was not trying to replace Penelope. He was not trying to recapture the past. He was just dancing with a kind woman at a county fair, and it felt good to connect with another human being after so long alone. When the music ended, they stood there for a moment, slightly breathless. "Thank you," Patricia said. "I needed that more than I realized." "So did I." Over the next few months, Fletcher found himself spending time with Patricia. He helped her set up her dress shop, using his strength to move heavy furniture and build display shelves. She cooked him dinners, proper meals that reminded him he had been surviving on hardtack and jerky for far too long. They took walks together, talking about everything and nothing. It was not romance, not at first. It was just two lonely people finding comfort in companionship. But slowly, gradually, something shifted. Fletcher found himself looking forward to seeing Patricia. He thought about her when they were apart. He noticed little things, like the way she laughed or the way she concentrated when she was sewing. He felt guilty about it at first, like he was betraying Penelope's memory. But one night, sitting alone in his house, he could almost hear Penelope's voice telling him he was being an idiot. She would want him to be happy. She had made him promise not to disappear into grief. Finding happiness with her sister, who understood his loss because she carried her own, that was not a betrayal. It was a blessing. Still, he moved slowly. He was 54 years old, set in his ways, scarred inside and out. He did not know if he could open his heart again, did not know if he had anything left to give. Patricia was patient. She did not push, did not demand. She just existed beside him, steady and kind and understanding. In the spring of 1900, Fletcher took Patricia up into the mountains. He showed her the cabin where he had lived with Penelope, showed her the graves of his parents, showed her the meadows and streams and hidden places he loved. She did not try to compete with Penelope's memory. She just listened and appreciated and understood. "It is beautiful up here," she said, standing on the ridge overlooking the valley. "I can see why you loved it. Part of me still does, but it is lonely now. I was only happy here when I had someone to share it with." Patricia looked at him. "Fletcher, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "What do you want? For your life, I mean. For whatever years you have left." Fletcher thought about it, or really thought about it for the first time in years. "I want to be less alone. I want to wake up and have a reason to smile. I want to stop living in the past and figure out how to have a future." "Do you think you could have that? With me?" His heart started pounding. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" "I am saying that I care about you, Fletcher Jennings. I know I am not my sister. I know I can never be what she was to you, but I think we could be happy together, in our own way. Two old souls who understand loss and are not afraid of it." Fletcher took her hands in his. They were smaller than Penelope's had been, marked with needle pricks from years of sewing. "I care about you too, more than I thought I could care about anyone again. But I'm not an easy man. I'm rough and scarred, and I still wake up some mornings missing Penelope so much I can barely breathe. I wake up missing my husband too. Grief does not just disappear, but that does not mean we cannot make room for new happiness alongside it." "You are sure about this? About me?" Patricia smiled. "I am sure." They got married in June, a quiet ceremony with just a few witnesses. Thomas came home on leave for the wedding, and Margaret traveled from Santa Fe. Both were surprised but supportive, happy to see their father happy again. "She seems kind," Margaret whispered to Fletcher before the ceremony. "Mother would approve." "You think so?" "I know so. Mother always said all she wanted was for you to be loved and cared for. Patricia will do that." The wedding was nothing like his first one had been. There was no church, no crowd, just the judge and a few friends in the warm June sunshine. Patricia wore a simple blue dress she had made herself. Fletcher wore his best clothes, his hair and beard neatly trimmed. When the judge pronounced them married, Fletcher kissed his new wife and felt something he had not felt in 13 years. Hope for the future. Patricia moved into his house, bringing her sewing supplies and her few possessions. They settled into a comfortable rhythm. She ran her dress shop during the day, while Fletcher took the occasional guiding job. In the evenings, they cooked together and talked. On Sundays, they went on long walks together, exploring the countryside. It was different from his marriage to Penelope, but different did not mean worse. With Penelope, everything had been passionate intensity, young love burning bright. With Patricia, it was gentler, steadier, the love of two people who had already survived the worst and found each other on the other side. Fletcher found himself laughing again, actually laughing, at Patricia's dry wit and funny observations. He found himself planning for the future, talking about maybe taking a trip to California to meet Patricia's children, or inviting Thomas and Margaret for Christmas. The nightmares about Penelope's death started to fade. The guilt about moving on eased. He would always love Penelope, would always carry her memory. But he was learning that the heart could hold more than one love, that there was room for both grief and joy. In the fall of 1901, Margaret got married to a teacher she had met in Santa Fe. Fletcher walked her down the aisle with Patricia beside him, and when Margaret looked back at him with tears in her eyes, he smiled and knew everything would be all right. Thomas came home for the wedding too, bringing a young woman he introduced as his fiancée. They were planning to marry the following spring, settle down somewhere near Fort Stanton when Thomas's enlistment was up. "My children are all growing up and moving on," Fletcher said to Patricia that night. They were lying in bed, the window open to let in the cool night air. "They are supposed to. That is what children do." "I know, it just makes me feel old," Patricia laughed. "We are old, but that is all right. We have earned every gray hair and wrinkle." Fletcher pulled her closer. "I'm glad I found you, or you found me. However it happened." "Me too." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you ever think about that first fair? When you met Penelope?" "Sometimes. Why?" "Just thinking about fate, I suppose. How we can meet someone at the right time or the wrong time, and everything changes. You met Penelope at exactly the right time. You were both young and ready for adventure. If you had met later or earlier, it might not have worked. And us? We met at exactly the right time, too. Two people who had loved and lost and were ready to try again. Not better or worse than what you had with Penelope. Just different. Just right for now." Fletcher thought about that. He thought about the boy he had been at 17, blood on his knuckles, asking a girl to dance. He thought about the man he had become, scarred and weathered and worn by life. He thought about Penelope in her yellow dress and Patricia in her blue one. "You are right," he said finally. "It is all about timing." The years continued to flow by. Thomas married his sweetheart and had a baby boy they named Fletcher after his grandfather. Margaret had twins, a boy and a girl, and continued teaching. Fletcher and Patricia became grandparents, a role they embraced with joy. Fletcher was 60 when he finally decided to sell the mountain cabin. It had been sitting empty for years, and maintaining it was becoming difficult. Part of him mourned the loss, but another part felt relief. That chapter of his life was over. It was time to let it go. With the money from the sale, he and Patricia bought a bigger house in town, one with room for all their children and grandchildren to visit. They filled it with laughter and love, creating new memories to sit alongside the old ones. Fletcher's body was failing in small ways. His shoulder hurt on cold mornings, his left arm was weaker than ever. But his heart was full, and that mattered more. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Patricia surprised him by renting a booth at the county fair, the same fair that had returned to Fort Stanton. They walked through the fairgrounds hand in hand, older and grayer than they had been, but still together. "Look," Patricia said, pointing to the dance floor. "They still have the paper lanterns." Fletcher looked at the lanterns swaying in the evening breeze and remembered two moments, dancing with Penelope when he was 17 and dancing with Patricia when he was 54. Both precious, both perfect in their own ways. "Want to dance?" he asked. "Always." They danced slowly, carefully. Two old people who had learned that love was not just about the fierce passion of youth. It was about showing up day after day. It was about choosing each other again and again. It was about building a life together out of whatever materials you had, even if those materials were grief and loss and second chances. When the music ended, Fletcher held Patricia close and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For finding me at that fair, for giving me a reason to keep living, for loving me even when I am difficult. You are not difficult, you are just you, and I love you exactly as you are." They stayed at the fair until the lanterns were blown out and the crowds dispersed. Then they walked home through the quiet streets of Fort Stanton, their fingers intertwined, their steps matched. Fletcher was 64 years old, a mountain man who had learned to live in town, a widower who had found love again, a father and grandfather building a legacy that would outlast him. His body bore the scars of his life, the claw marks from the mountain lion, the aching shoulder, the rough hands marked by years of hard work. But his heart, that battered and rebuilt organ, was whole. Not unmarked, never unmarked, but whole nonetheless. In the years that followed, Fletcher and Patricia settled into a peaceful rhythm. They grew older together, their hair turning white, their movements slower. Thomas's children grew tall and strong. Margaret's twins showed signs of her intelligence and determination. The family gathered often, filling the house with noise and chaos and joy. Fletcher told his grandchildren stories about the mountains, about tracking elk through deep snow and seeing wolves hunt beneath the stars. He told them about their grandmother Penelope, making sure they knew the woman who had made him into the man he became. He told them about courage and love and never giving up, even when life seemed impossibly hard. Patricia taught the granddaughters to sew, and the grandsons too, saying there was no shame in a man knowing how to mend his own clothes. She told them about their Aunt Penelope, her sister, who had been brave enough to follow a mountain man into the wilderness and strong enough to build a life there. Together, Fletcher and Patricia created a home full of stories and memories, linking past and present, honoring what had been while celebrating what was. Fletcher was 70 when he took his last trip into the mountains. His children did not want him to go, worried about his age and health, but Patricia understood. "He needs to say goodbye," she told them. "Let him go." So Fletcher rode north one final time, his body protesting every mile but his spirit soaring. He visited the cabin, now owned by a young family who kept it in good repair. He stood by his parents' graves and Penelope's empty marker, the one he had placed there even though she was buried in Taos. He walked the ridgelines and breathed the thin mountain air. "I loved you," he said to the wind, to Penelope's memory, to the mountains themselves. "I loved you with everything I had. But I have to let you go now. I have to finish my life down below, with Patricia and the grandchildren and whatever time I have left." The wind whispered through the pines, and Fletcher chose to believe it was approval, blessing, permission to be happy. He returned to Fort Stanton and never left again. His traveling days were over, but that was all right. Everything he needed was right there in town. Patricia died peacefully in her sleep when she was 73, Fletcher 75. He woke up one morning to find her gone, her face peaceful, one hand still holding his. The grief hit him like a landslide, but it was different from losing Penelope. He had been young then, unprepared for the cruelty of death. Now he was old, and he knew that death was just another part of the journey. He mourned Patricia deeply, genuinely, but he did not let it destroy him. He had promised Penelope he would not disappear into grief, and he kept that promise until the end. Thomas and Margaret moved him into Thomas's house, refusing to let him live alone. Fletcher protested but secretly was grateful. He did not want to be alone, not at the end. He lived 2 more years, surrounded by family, telling stories, offering advice, loving his grandchildren with the fierce devotion of someone who knew how precious time was. His body failed piece by piece, but his mind stayed sharp until nearly the end. On a warm spring evening in 1916, with his children at his bedside and the window open to let in the smell of blooming flowers, Fletcher Jennings took his last breath. His final words were, "I see her. She's wearing yellow." They buried him in the Fort Stanton cemetery between Patricia and an empty plot where Penelope's marker stood. The whole town came to the funeral. His children spoke about his bravery and strength. His grandchildren cried and told stories about the mountain man grandfather who had taught them to track and shoot and survive. But the best eulogy came from his youngest grandson, Margaret's boy, who stood up and said, "Grandpa Fletcher told me once that life was about finding the people who made your heart feel like home. He said he was lucky because he found that twice. He said the mountains were beautiful, but love was better." I think he was right. Fletcher Jennings had been a mountain man, a hunter, a guide, a father, a grandfather, and a husband twice over. He had loved deeply and lost terribly and found the courage to love again. He had lived through an era of change, watched the Wild West transform into something tamer and more civilized. But his greatest achievement was not his survival or his strength. It was his capacity for love. He had loved Penelope with the fierce passion of youth. He had loved his children with protective devotion. He had loved Patricia with the gentle wisdom of age. And that love rippled outward, touching everyone who knew him. Years after his death, his great-grandchildren would visit his grave and wonder about the man who rested there. They would hear the stories, passed down through generations, about the boy who met a girl at a county fair and danced with her under paper lanterns, about the mountain man who fought a cougar to save a neighbor, about the widower who found love again when he thought all hope was lost, and they would understand that Fletcher Jennings's life was not measured in the years he lived or the places he traveled. It was measured in the moments of connection, the acts of courage, the decision to keep loving even when love brought pain. The mountains he loved so much still stood, unchanging and eternal. But the legacy he left behind was warmer, more human, more precious than any wilderness. It was a legacy of love, hard-won and deeply felt, passed down through the generations like a treasured inheritance. Fletcher had entered the world alone and poor, a mountain child with nothing but his father's knowledge and his own determination. He left it surrounded by family, rich in love and memory, knowing that he had lived fully and loved completely. That was enough. That was everything. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, two women in yellow and blue dresses were waiting for him, both smiling, both ready to dance under eternal lanterns that never dimmed. He would dance with each of them, honoring both loves, grateful for both chances. Because Fletcher Jennings had learned the greatest lesson of all, that the heart was not a finite resource but an infinite well, and that love, true love, never really ended. It just changed form, like water becoming ice, becoming steam, always present, always transforming, always essential to life itself. His story was not unique in its elements, a man living and loving and losing in the American West, but it was unique in its truth. Every moment had been real, every choice had mattered, every love had been genuine, and that made all the difference. The fairs still came every year, bringing music and laughter and dancing to the towns of New Mexico. Paper lanterns still swayed in the evening breeze. Young people still met and fell in love, starting their own stories under those same lanterns. The cycle continued, as it always had and always would. But for those who knew the story of Fletcher and Penelope and Patricia, those fairs held extra meaning. They were reminders that love could strike like lightning at any age, that second chances were real, that even in the hardest times, joy could be found. Fletcher's grandchildren and great-grandchildren would sometimes go to the county fair and stand near the dance floor, watching couples spin and sway, and they would remember. They would remember the mountain man who learned to dance, who loved so deeply it transformed him, who showed them all that strength was not just about muscles and survival skills. True strength was about opening your heart even after it had been broken. True courage was about choosing love over loneliness, hope over despair, connection over isolation. Fletcher Jennings had been strong in all the ways that mattered, and his story, passed down through the generations, continued to inspire long after he was gone. The mountains stood eternal, wearing their crown of snow and pine. The fairs came and went with the seasons, and somewhere in the fabric of time, a boy with bloodied knuckles asked a girl in yellow to dance, and she said yes, and everything changed. That was the beginning. The middle was struggle and joy and heartbreak and healing. The end was peace and family and love multiplied across generations. It was, in every way that counted, a life well lived, a love story for the ages, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the power of connection. Fletcher Jennings, mountain man and gentle soul, had found his way through the wilderness of life and emerged on the other side, bruised but unbroken, scarred but whole, alone at times but never unloved. And that was the greatest triumph of all.